Welcome back, everybody. These are the best horror films from the year 1985. We're at the midway point of the 80s. To me, the 80s were the best decade for horror movies because that's where predominantly you had the majority of slasher films, led by in part by Psycho in the 60s, and then you had Black Christmas in the 70s and Halloween in the 78, and then Friday the 13th and all that jazz. So now we're on to the best horror films. These are all the horror films. This is every single horror film that was released in theaters worldwide, at your hometown, every country of origin. No, these are the best films, best horror films of 1985. Now, this list may not be all inclusive, but to me it is. So enjoy the list because there's a lot of films that you may not remember or forgotten about. Some that you'll remember and love. Some that I hated that one. But let's check out the list. Let's check out the best horror films. All the horror films that were released in 1985. Halloween's almost here. So what better way than to research these films and start popping in your DVDs or look them up on streaming services. And October is Halloween month. So let's check out the best horror films of 1985. All right, let's check them out. Zuma. Zuma is a movie remake of one of the oldest and most popular comic books in the Philippines. It stars Zuma, a creature donning a snake over his soldier, which perfectly accentuates his monster-like features. Zuma, action, drama, fantasy, and horror. A Polish vampire in Burbank. A somewhat reluctant vampire is taken out by his sexpot sister for his first night out on the town. Parody, satire, comedy, and horror. A Polish vampire in Burbank. Total 80s. A Nightmare on Elm Street 2. Freddy's Revenge. I love this movie. It was awesome. A teenage boy is haunted in his dreams by deceased child murderer Freddy Krueger. A Nightmare on Elm Street 2 will not disappoint. After Darkness. To salve his guilty conscience, an elder brother removes his disturbed younger sibling from a mental institution after a suicide attempt. Drama, horror, and thriller. After Darkness, featuring John Hurt and Julian Sands. Appointment with Fear, slasher horror. Here we go. A man under the influence of an ancient Egyptian curse uses his astral projection to kill those who protect his baby son from him. Appointment with Fear, slasher horror and fantasy. Attack of the Beast Creatures. Survivors of a shipwreck wash up on an island and run into small, vicious creatures. Oh, I love it. Attack of the Beast Creatures. You gotta check this out. Little monsters terrorizing. Remember, this is 1985. Biohazard. Alien monster uses a psychic to try to take over the Earth. Horror and sci-fi. Biohazard. Kind of cheesy, but it's pretty good. Look at the poster there. But it's good. This is 1985. Bits and Pieces. Another slasher horror. A psychopath with a mother fixation terrorizes a city, picking out young, beautiful women as his victims. Bits and Pieces. A mother fixation. Blood Tracks. Again, slasher horror. A film crew producing a rock music video decides to shoot at an abandoned factory above the snow line. When an avalanche strands them, a murderous family living in the factory attacks and kills many of them. Blood Tracks. Blood Cult. Slasher horror. Female students on a college campus are being killed and their body parts used for blood sacrifices. Blood Cult. If you love 1985, you love the 80s, 1985 was a great year for horror. Bloodstream. All these movies with the word blood. After a slasher horror. After a low-budget horror filmmaker is swindled by a home video distributor, he decides to make a snuff film where he murders all those who have wronged him. Bloodstream. I love it. Boggy Creek 2 and the legend continues. A professor and 3 of his students camp out in the wilderness to find a Bigfoot-type creature. Boggy Creek 2 and the legend continues. Adventure, drama, and horror. Terror at London Bridge. Slasher horror. I just recently saw this. I love it. Jack the Ripper is on the loose in Lake Havasu, Arizona. and it's up to a local detective, David Hasselhoff, to stop him. This is creepy. Cat's Eye. A stray cat is the linking element of three tales of suspense and horror. Drew Barrymore, James Woods, Alan King, and Kenneth McMillan. Cat's Eye. Monster horror and comedy. Cemetery of Terror. Slasher horror. On Halloween, a group of medical students steal the corpse of a serial killer from a morgue and raise him from the dead, inadvertently putting themselves and a group of young neighborhood children in danger. I love it. Cemetery of Terror. Chiller. Corporate exec Miles dies and is cryogenically frozen in the hope that he can be revived. 10 years later, the procedure is a success and Miles returns without his soul. Chiller. Mansion of the Living Dead. A group of vacationing waitresses visit a resort hotel on the Canary Islands, only to find out that the former monastery's monks nearby have returned as living blind dead. Mansion of the Living Dead. Creature. After a member of a geological research team who has sent to Saturn's largest moon, Titan crashes their spacecraft into a space station where monsters roam. Creature. Featuring Stan Ivar. Crime Wave. A pair of whacked-out cartoon-like exterminator hitmen kill the owner of a burglar alarm company and stalk the partner who hired them. Crime Wave. Dark comedy, parody, slapstick, and horror. Cut and Run. A reporter and her cameraman connect a surviving Jonestown leader and a TV exec's missing son to a drug war where jungle installations are being massacred by an army of natives and zombies. Day of the Dead. As the world is overrun by zombies, a group of scientists and military personnel sheltering in an underground bunker in Florida must decide on how they should deal with the undead horde. This movie is awesome. Day of the Dead. Death in the Shadows. They murdered the woman she thought was her mother, and now they're after her. But why? A woman and her daughter lives in Odix village near Amsterdam. Death in the Shadows. Horror. Kakidama. A reporter heads out to the forest to investigate a strange phenomenon and adds up getting a little more than he bargained for when he gets infected with an ancient mythical Japanese spirit known as Kakidama. Demons. A group of random people are invited to a screening of a mysterious movie, only to find themselves trapped in the theater with ravenous demons. I love it. Demons. Body horror, dark comedy, and horror. Devil's Story. A deformed man living with his mother in the countryside roams the woods, killing indiscriminately. Sort of like Friday the 13th Part 2. A couple spend the night nearby and the wife goes through a nightmarish experience. Devil's Story. Evils of the Night. Vacationing teens are systematically kidnapped and taken to a strange rural hospital run by a mysterious group that needs their blood. Evils of the Night. Horror and sci-fi. 7 Hyden Park, La Casa Maldita. David Warbeck stars as an instructor who marries a traumatized, crippled woman. The wife suffers from PTSD and is tormented by a traumatic event. Horror, mystery, and thriller. 7 Hyden Park, La Casa Maldita. Friday the 13th, A New Beginning. Slasher horror. Still haunted by his past, Tommy Jarvis, who as a child killed Jason Voorhees, is sent to a secluded halfway house in the countryside. Friday the 13th, A New Beginning. Fright Night. I love it. Fright Night sees a teenager believing that the newcomer in his neighborhood is a vampire. He turns to an actor in a television-hosted horror movie show for help to deal with the undead. Supernatural horror. Future Kill. The star of the Texas Chainsaw Massacre returns in a story about frat boys lost in the big city while hunted by a violent leader and his elite gang of gun-happy guards. Adventure, comedy, and horror. Girl School Screamers. Slasher horror. 7 college girls spend the weekend at an elegant estate which begins as a fun-filled adventure but ends in a nightmare of gut-wrenching terror. Girl School Screamers. Godzilla 1985. 30 years after the original Monsters Rampage, A new Godzilla emerges and attacks Japan. This movie was good. Corny, but good. I love it. Hard Rock Zombies. Of course, this is 1985. A freshly out of the grave band of hard rock zombies is thirsty to take sweet revenge as they give the performance of a lifetime. Comedy, horror, and music. Hard Rock Zombies. Hellhole. A young woman becomes amnesiac after an attack by a hired killer. She's admitted to a mental asylum run by a ruthless doctor who experiments on her patients with a lethal drug. Hellhole. Horror House on Highway 5. Slasher horror. A van full of college students traveling down a highway is terrorized by a psycho killer in a Richard Nixon mask. If you love slasher, you'll love this movie. House. This movie is creepy and good. A troubled writer moves into a haunted house after inheriting it from his aunt. House. I love this movie. It's very creepy. A lot of jump scares. Check it out. You'll love it. Howling 2. Your sister is a werewolf. A man discovers that his sister was a werewolf and helps an investigator track down a gang of the monsters through the United States and Eastern Europe. Werewolf horror, and thriller. Making contact. Believing to be able to communicate with his deceased father, a young boy develops psychic powers where he uses them to try and stop supernatural forces threatening his family and friends. Action, adventure, drama, and horror. Junior. Slasher horror. Casey and Joe are two hardened female ex-cons who decide to build a marina on lake in backwoods Texas to start a life of themselves, only to be hassled by the redneck locals who kill people. Life Force. A race of space vampires arrives in London and infects the populace, beginning an apocalyptic descent into chaos. Life Force. This movie is good. Check it out. Massacre in Dinosaur Valley. A small plane carrying fossil hunters crashes in the Amazon jungle, and the survivors must battle their way through cannibals, wild animals, and slave traders. Jungle adventure, action adventure, and horror. Mr. Vampire. Slapstick supernatural horror. The planned reburial of a town elder goes awry as the corpse resurrects itself into a hopping bloodthirsty vampire, targeting everyone responsible for his death. Mr. Vampire. Murder Lust. A Sunday school teacher security guard named Steve is a vicious serial killer who is strangling innocent women and dumping their bodies in the desert. Murder Lust. This movie is total 80s. The Nail Gun Massacre. Dark comedy slasher horror. After a young girl is gang raped by a crew of construction workers, someone starts killing off members of the group with a nail gun. Oh, I love it. If you love the 80s, 1985 is it. Night Train to Terror. Night Train to Terror is a 1985 horror anthology movie where God and Satan are on a train discussing the fate of three individuals. That is very, very good. Monster horror supernatural. Once Bitten. Parody vampire horror comedy. A vampire countess needs to drink the blood of a virgin in order to keep her eternal beauty. It seems that all is hopeless until she bumps into Mark Kendall, featuring Jim Carrey. Phenomena. A young girl who has amazing ability to communicate with insects is transferred to an exclusive Swiss boarding school where her unusual capability might help solve a string of murders. Slasher horror. Phenomena. Psycho Girls. A woman breaks out of an insane asylum accompanied by two crazed inmates to kill her sister. Psycho Girls. Parody, comedy, and horror. Slasher horror. El Sur. Horror. A woman recovering from the death of her husband suspects that her house has been invaded by demonic spirits. She summons a paranormal expert to help her get rid of them. El Sur. Horror. Reanimator, one of the best films of 85, horror. After an odd new medical student arrives on campus, a dedicated local and his girlfriend become involved in bizarre experiments centering around the reanimation of dead tissue. Screenplay. A detective investigating a series of murders discovers that they are similar to the slayings that occur in the new script of a Hollywood screenwriter. Parody, comedy, horror, and mystery. Screenplay will not disappoint. Silver Bullet. One of the best horror films of all time. Super scary. In a small town, brutal killings start to plague the close-knit community. Marty Coleslaw, a paraplegic boy, is convinced the murders are the doings of a werewolf. Terminal Choice. A patient in a hospital dies under mysterious circumstances. The attending doctor is suspected. He had been fired already from his last position due to malpractice. Terminal Choice. The Comic. In a future police state, a stand-up comic murders a competitor for a job, then gets mixed up with a stripper. Drama, horror, and sci-fi. The Comic. The Dark Power is total 80s. The spirits of dead Indians are haunting a couple's house, and they call in an exorcist, whose trademark is a black whip, to get rid of them. The Dark Power. The Oracle. A spirit reaches out from beyond the grave in an attempt to contact a young woman to help it avenge its murder. Crime and horror. The Oracle. This movie is creepy and good, so check out The Oracle. The Ripper. I always loved Jack the Ripper movies. An old antique ring turns a college professor into a homicidal maniac when he puts it on. The ring originally belonged to Jack the Ripper, and the Ripper's spirit possesses whoever wears it. I love it. So that was a slasher horror. The Sea Serpent. A serpent created by radioactivity threatens a Spanish coastal town. The Sea Serpent. Adventure and horror. I love these monster movies. I love 1985. Just the era, the clothes, the hair, everything. I love it. The Strangeness. A group of explorers surveying an abandoned gold mine are trapped in a cave and find themselves at the mercy of a slimy, mysterious creature. The Strangeness. I love it. Horror. Otra Vuelta de Tuerca. Another twist. A sexually conflicted young man is hired to take care of two orphan siblings in a remote seaside mansion, and soon realizes that the ghosts of two former servants are trying to possess the children. The Bad Seed. A freak fatal accident forces a widow to realize that her 9-year-old daughter was born to kill. The Bad Seed. Very creepy and evil. Eternal Evil. A director of TV commercials learns about astral projection. He has a out-of-body experience during his sleep, and his dad-in-law and doctor die mysteriously. Eternal Evil. The Midnight Hour. I love it. Total 80s. Phil, Melissa, Mitch, Mary, and Minnie are high school friends who unwittingly raise the dead on Halloween night. Once the dead have returned, Pitchfork Cove will never be the same again. The Return of the Living Dead. When two bumbling employees at a medical supply warehouse accidentally release a deadly gas into the air, the vapor causes the dead to rise again as zombies. This movie is awesome. It's dark comedy and horror. The Doctor and the Devils. In Victorian England, two grave robbers supply a wealthy doctor with bodies to research anatomy on, but greed causes them to look for a more simple way to get the job done. The Bride. After years of research, the doctor finally succeeds in creating the perfect woman, who gets the name Eva. So this is like the Bride of Frankenstein, Eva, featuring Sting as Frankenstein. The New Kids. I love this movie. Check it out if you haven't. I watched The New Kids. Newly orphaned siblings Abby and Lauren arrive in small Florida town to help their Aunt Faye and Uncle Charlie run a family-owned amusement park, and they find out that the town is terrorized by a local street gang. Horror. The Stuff. I love The Stuff. A delicious, mysterious goo that oozes from the earth is marketed as the newest dessert sensation, but the tasty treats rot more than teeth when zombie-like snackers who only want to consume more of the strange substance. It's ugh. They don't cut the grass anymore. Two Texas gardeners who object to northern attitudes and lifestyles venture northward to cut lawns, trim hedges, and murder and mutilate northern yuppies. The 13th day of Christmas. On Christmas night, parents leave their psychotic son alone in the house. The 13th day of Christmas. I love it. This was a TV episode, but it's horror. I love it. Thou shalt not kill. Except Jack Stryker took 2 bullets in the leg in Vietnam and was carried back by one of his men. When he returns, he tries to live a quiet life in his cabin and go back with his girlfriend. Action, adventure, and horror. Transylvania 65000. 2 tabloid reporters are sent to Transylvania to find the Frankenstein monster or get fired. They are laughed out there, but something suspicious is going on. Parody, vampire, horror, and comedy. Underworld. When high-class hooker Nicole is kidnapped from her brothel, rich businessman Hugo hires her ex-love Roy to find her. Action, horror, and sci-fi. Underworld. Vampire Hunter D. When Doris N. Lang is chosen as the next bride for the vampire Count Magnus, she will hire a mysterious vampire hunter known only as D and attempt to escape her ill-gotten fate. Warning sign. A timid security guard, her ailing supervisor mentor, her sheriff husband, and an alcoholic former scientist team up to stop a viral outbreak in rural biological weapons lab. Warning sign. Drama, sci-fi, horror, and thriller. Wizards of the Lost Kingdom. When evil screams throughout the world, when all the galaxies converge, when all that's fair and fine seems lost, a hero will emerge. Wizards of the Lost Kingdom. Those were the best horror films that came out in 1985. Those were all the horror films that in 1985. Please let me know if there's any horror films that were released that year that I did not include in this list or failed to remember. And there may be 1 or 2 films. Oh, you forgot this. Tony, you forgot this. What about this film? No. That's why I made this list so that you know all the horror. What were your favorite films in 1985? I love 1985. I love everything about 1985. It's just a great year. The 80s were a great era. And when you look back, when films are captured in the moment of time, you look at the culture. You can look at the clothes, the cars, the home decor, stores, streets, street signs, and just reminisce. And it looks like simpler times. Back then when you're living it, you don't think they're simple times. You probably reflect back to the 70s and 60s as simpler times. But now in 2024, when you look back in the 80s, it were simpler times compared to what it is now. There's no cell phones, there's no internet, and people are out there mingling. But look at the clothes, look at the hairstyles and the fashions. Again, look at the vehicles, look at the storefronts, the exterior shots, the interior decor. Look at all that stuff. And just something wholesome about those movies, especially horror movies. And they always get a group of kids, a group of students, unsuspecting kids, doing things they shouldn't. And they get killed off one by one. And you notice the trend in 1985, a psycho is on the loose. A psycho killer hunts them down, kills females. And but I love the Jack the Ripper films. I love Jack the Ripper. I love everything about Jack the Ripper. I mean, as far as movie-wise, I'm not saying I like Jack the Ripper. I'm saying, but those films, those period pieces, because that's kind of scary. Because back then, in those Victorian times or whenever Jack the Ripper was, 1800s, I guess, that must have been spooky. A serial killer back then, without all that technology, no CSI back then. You just found a dead body. So how do you find the killer back then? And so, yeah. But what were your favorite horror films of 1985? I love Freddy. Obviously Friday the 13th. That one. I also liked Freddy's Revenge. That one I liked a lot. That one was funny. Had some gay themes in there. The actor, I forgot his name, but the blonde actor who's paired up with that girl that looks like Meryl Streep. Remember that one? I swear she's like Meryl Streep's daughter or sister. But when I look at Friday the 13th, or sorry, Freddy's Revenge, A Nightmare on Elm Street 2, that girl, I forgot her name, but when you see her, everyone in the theater, because I remember watching in the theater, we all thought it was Meryl Streep. And every time she was on, we couldn't help it, it was Meryl Streep. That woman is Meryl Streep. But that movie was corny and cheesy, but it was good. That's why we all love horror films. We love goofing on them. We love covering our eyes. We love breaking out the popcorn. All right, so those were the horror films, the best horror films that came out. Those were all the horror films that were that were released in 1985. Hope you're enjoying this series. I'm having a lot of fun. Again, I don't take myself seriously. I'm not a film expert. I'm just like you. We're film buffs. We have our own collections. We have our own likes and dislikes, and we share them with one another. Some people like these films. Some people like other films. But what brings us together is the love of films, and particularly right now, the love of horror films. So I'm trying to give you, from what I can, the best of these horror films of every year, every decade, as best I can. And again, I need your help or input. If you see me approaching a year, 1988, 1994, 2000, Tony, don't forget to include this film. Tony, don't forget to include this film. So I don't forget to include those films. All right? So those were the best horror films of 1985. Thanks for everybody for supporting me, sticking around. You're watching Yesteryear TV. Stay tuned for the best horror films of 1986. All right? There is no end in sight. I can go on, and we're going to have fun. So there's no time frame. There's no timetable. I just make these videos as I go. They're spontaneous, but I'm having a lot of fun. And we do things because they're fun. If they become a chore or a job, then it's not fun and I wouldn't do it. All right, so that's why I do what I do. I'm having fun, and I'm glad there's people like you out there that are joining me and having fun discussing these movies. All right, thanks everybody. Again, thank you for all your support, and I'll see you all in the next video.